Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ethicast. I'm your host, Bill Coffin, and in this special episode, we'll be sharing an exclusive interview with Julie Ann Crommet, CEO of Collective Moxie, who recently keynoted at the 14th Annual Global Ethics Summit. Julie Ann has worked exclusively with Hollywood film studios to ensure that the stories they tell reference culture faithfully, respectfully, and inclusively. In her keynote, Julianne shared how inclusive storytelling can help organizations address bias and drive better outcomes for diversity, equity, and inclusion. After her GES keynote, Julianne joined us on the Ethicast to dig a little deeper into these issues on inclusive storytelling. We're going to play that interview for you in just a moment, but be sure to stick around to learn afterwards how you can register to see Julianne's keynote and so much more from this year's Global Ethics Summit. Now, an important note before we begin. It is with no small irony that during our conversation on inclusivity, I repeatedly got Julianne's name wrong. I called her Julie, not Julianne, which is a mistake I made in the moment. Unfortunately, I can't fix that in our footage, but I am very grateful to Julianne for calling out my mistake afterwards so that I would not repeat it going forward. Julianne, thank you very much for that. Names matter, they have power, and it's important that we get them right. And now, here's our interview with Julie Ann Crommet from Collective Moxie. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the Ethicast. I'm Bill Coffin, editor-in-chief of Ethisphere Magazine and co-host of the Ethicast. And with me today is Julie Ann Crommet, CEO and founder of Collective Moxie. Julie, so good to have you here. Thank you so much.
So wonderful to be here, Bill.
So we're recording this after coming off of a dynamite keynote that Julie gave here at the 14th Annual 2023 Global Ethics Summit about inclusivity and storytelling and the power of that. And I just have to say, I was geeking out in a great big way when I was watching. I'm a fan of all the stuff you've done. When you were saying who's seen Prey, I wanted to bust through the wall like Kool-Aid because I've seen Prey. I love Prey. I watched the Comanche version of it.
Yes, you did.
Okay. No, it was so awesome. So awesome.
Can I ask a question? Because This is an informal poll I'm doing.
By all means.
Comanche version better than the English version?
By a mile.
Yes.
Yes.
See, everybody says
this. It's by a mile. And I'm the kind of cinephile. I love watching movies in their original language and reading subtitles.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But there was an energy and there's a passion and there's a immediacy to the way the language was used in that
right.
version. And something you said that was really fantastic because I had heard about this movie. And I was like, wow, this is the first movie ever shot in Comanche. So I was like, I'm here for this. I want to check it out.
Yeah.
But you mentioned how there's a very interesting decision when you watch the movie. You don't have to go into normal language parameters to bring up Comanche. It was a very like main screen. It was so easy to access that. And I thought that was an amazing part because in your keynote, you talked about this unfortunate moment during Wreck-It Ralph. Where the character Tiana, her dimensions of diversity kind of got wiped out of it because the digital models of the character and the lighting algorithms kind of erased some of the features that she should have had. And you were talking about how there's like technical aspects that support an inherent bias in storytelling.
Yeah.
The Comanche version, I thought that was a really ingenious way where the language options were so foremost, it removed a potential systemic barrier to inclusivity that you often see when you go into language. So I was wondering if you could talk about that decision to get it up on the front of the screen.
Sure, absolutely. So I love that you asked this question. It's actually one of my favorite things to talk about. I said it in the keynote, but I really learned it in truth in New Zealand when I was the Maori tribe there, and they were welcoming us for a summit. Actually, a summit where I wore the same jacket, hilariously. And
it's a great jacket.
Thank you. And what is standard in other countries, not necessarily the United States, is an honoring of the land which you are essentially asking for permission to be on because of colonialism. And one of the things that one of the tribal leaders said that really stuck with me was that culture is language and language is culture. Mm-hmm. And when you think about how technology can enable that conversation, to me, Prey is like the best example, because basically what it does is when you take away the barriers for folks to engage in other languages, and in this case, sort of a central language, a cultural element to the project, so that it sits in almost equal position to English, you're making a statement actually about the importance of the language itself. And when the director and team first came to 20th Century Studios, not part of Disney, who owns the Predator franchise, and said, hey, y'all, like, we want to do this film and we want to do it in Comanche. Disney was like, well, we can't have you only do it in Comanche because we also need it in English and in other languages. And they said, that's fine. That's fine. Get it.
Yeah.
But there was a sudden non-negotiable of the Comanche version has to be treated with the same reverence as the English version. And obviously that makes a statement on multiple levels.
Yeah.
And so that decision was made very early on, so that then when it was going to be released technically on the platform, it was an intentional decision to make it literally, as you said, available on the main screen.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to go digging in the language menu. And the profundity of the fact that, as you even said, that version has actually become a fan favorite shows why the immediacy of language to the cultural authenticity of the piece really matters. At the end of the day.
So if I can ask you about another movie that I'm a massive fan of, is, that I know that you worked on, is Black Panther.
Yes.
So one of the things I noticed,
forever. Anyway.
Wakanda forever, absolutely, Imam Bey. And by the way, rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman.
Yes.
Rest in power, Chadwick Boseman. We lost him too soon. But that's kind of, it's actually going to get a little bit to what I'm talking about, which is, I remember, so I've been a long-time Marvel fan, so I was here for every Marvel movie. But you know what? I have never had a problem seeing myself in these characters, because for the vast majority of all this entertainment, the characters are made to look like me. So I didn't have to look for something where where I feel included. When I was in the theater seeing other movies, and when I would see trailers from Black Panther come up, Black moviegoers were with me. I remember seeing this one family in particular. Their kids were just, they weren't there for the movie practically. They're there for the trailer, and seeing themselves in T'Challa was such a massive moment. I actually got my kids. I was like, check this out. This is why this matters. You know, and it was a really powerful moment. But you know, when you go ahead to movies like Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, when those characters are removed from us, I had this very interesting moment where when T'Challa disappears, you could hear this. It wasn't just, we lost a hero. The people who saw themselves in that hero and having it taken away from them after getting it so recently hit very, very hard. And I would love to get your thoughts on, did you notice anything like that when you saw this in the theater? And also, in Endgame, he was the first character they gave back to us as well. You know, that had to be an intentional decision as well. So can you talk about that a little bit as far as the social covenant you make with an audience when you commit to inclusivity and then start playing with that inclusivity?
Absolutely. I think I love that you call it a social covenant, because that's exactly what it is. I'm actually going to borrow that phrase now and credit you.
It's all yours.
But it is really true, because part of what you're doing when you do inclusive storytelling, and really what that is just reflecting the world as it is and as it will be, right? And it's just that there's been a dearth for a lot of people in terms of seeing their world and their experience and their friends reflected, right? And what is perfect about that decision, I think, on multiple levels, is the layers of commentary that includes, which is this idea of fleetingness that can occur for different communities, right? This idea of, is the other shoe going to drop, right? And the profundity of that. Black Panther sits as one of the most important characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, without a doubt. And Kevin Feige has said it many times, amongst a lot of people at Marvel, Nate Moore, who's the exec on all the Black Panther films. And I think what, for me, I noticed both the reaction, both actually in terms of when he was taken and when he brought back, and also in the newest film, with so many of the decisions that were made in terms of, you know, spoiler alert, who takes over Black Panther and the backstory of some of the Black Panther's experience. And for me, part of the cultural covenant, Marvel actually understands it really well. And they understand the audience covenant really well, because they understand that you can't take for granted the idea that you have to constantly be building a relationship with the audience, as opposed to just like a one and done. And I think for me, that's the profundity of that moment, and also all the moments that came after it, because what you're acknowledging in that relationship with the audience is, this cannot be something that has just happened, because this has to be something that is deeply emotionally resonant, well wrought, 360 degrees, and then treated that way for the rest of the life cycle of that story. And I think that's why Prey, I think, resonates actually so deeply on multiple levels. I think that's actually why Encanto resonates so deeply on multiple levels, is because we get universality from specificity. The universal human experience comes through the specificity in storytelling. And I think that is counterintuitive for a lot of people, but it's because it's true. It's because so true. In the specificity of stories is where we feel the truth of the human experience. And then suddenly we all see ourselves in different aspects of those characters. And that for me is actually really the covenant, which is this idea of like, I, as a storyteller, have a responsibility that in everything that I do, it has to be done in a way that is well wrought and intentional, because I cannot take your intelligence for granted, audience, and your experience for granted. And I think that for me is something that Black Panther illustrates in droves, really.
Absolutely. You have time for one more question?
Sure, absolutely.
So one of the most odious things about fandom, when fandom turns toxic.
Oh yeah.
Right, and we've seen this with so many fantastic franchises where the fans become its own worst enemy. An iteration of that, or a manifestation of that really gets under my skin, is this terrible phrase, and it's always brought up whenever a franchise puts in the work to really to encourage inclusivity from the point of inception. And it's this whole notion of go woke, go broke, right? And I just loathe that phrase so much for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it's not witty and it's patently untrue.
Right.
Here at Ethisphere, we often say that ethics is good business.
Yeah.
And you had a great story about how how the live action remake of Aladdin put a lot of work into addressing problematic aspects of the original animated version, and making sure that not just that those problems weren't repeated, but also that opportunities weren't missed, and the results were really in how well the movie's been received. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, just about in general how this work on inclusivity really, it's not just a feel-good exercise. It's morally correct, it's ethically imperative, but it's also a fantastic business decision. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. You have now hit on my other favorite topic. Look, I promise this is not a plant. I didn't know he was going to ask me this question. Everything for me about this is that it has to be true to the story and it has to be successful in every way. For a host of reasons. One, because why wouldn't you want it to be? But secondly, we as a society can't actually afford to have things not work when there has been such little representation across different media and representation of different groups, intersections of identities, however you want to put it, right, regions of the world. And so every single data point that exists out there points to exactly what you all are professing at Ethisphere, right? Which is, this is just good business at the end of the day. And not only that, I put it one step further, which is this is really good creative. Really good creative means really good business, which is why when somebody asked me one of the questions in the session, I said, you have to really focus on the creative always as the lead in the dance, right? Because if you focus too much on just one aspect of the culture or on quote unquote getting it right, you miss the human specificity component that actually makes the story successful as such. And so for me, the greatest examples of this are just even in recent history. In 2022, Encanto and Turning Red were the two most streamed movies of the year, both focused on young women of color, right, non-white women. And in the case of Turning Red, directed by Domi Shi, who is a Chinese-Canadian filmmaker who was basically telling her story of her childhood. And by the way, we're about the same age, so I will say I appreciated the boy bands references throughout the whole film, but that it just shows you those were the movies that resonated most with audiences, the hits, right? And you see that in every aspect. I mean, Black Panther, one of the most successful movies of literally all time.
So massive.
Literally just behind the Avengers that also has Black Panther in it, right? And one of my favorite stories is looking at it from a global context. I think a lot of times we see these statistics and we think, okay, that's in the US. But what about globally? Because these rumors have persisted for so long, like Black-led films don't travel abroad. Black Panther kind of shattered that in every way, right? Because it's a leading movie, a top 5 movie in almost every major market in the world in some way, right? Or, how is Encanto going to translate globally or whatever? And we see these stats come back. One of the most profound anecdotes for me on the business success piece globally is Coco, the movie Coco, which, by the way, sits in my heart, audience at home, as one of my favorite movies of all time.
The tears.
I know, we're not supposed to have favorites.
I
love you, Pixar.
It's so good.
But, when you sing, everybody, when you hear Remember Me, it's just tears.
Cry.
I know, I'm already crying. I'm getting emotional thinking about the ending of that film.
I know.
And what's amazing about Coco is when it premiered in China, opening weekend box office in China, it is still, to this day, the #1 Pixar film in China ever.
Wow.
And it's one of the top animated films in China ever.
Astonishing. Yeah.
And what was incredible was in the specificity of Day of the Dead, of Mexican culture, as you can define it, right? With that family, with those characters, with the music, it translated directly to the Chinese market and people in a way that folks were crying in the movie theater, and literally third parties started hawking cocoa tissues in the movie theater for moviegoers opening weekend. That is a true story.
That's outstanding.
And for me, it actually, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it either was pretty close or outperformed the U.S. opening weekend with cocoa.
Wow, that's impressive.
And for me, that is such a critical example of when we mean that specificity is universality, it means it globally, because there's something about human experience globally that specificity taps into.
Yeah.
And in the case of the Chinese market, it connected to the respective elders in their culture, in the culture that has existed for generations. And they also have their own version of a Day of the Dead festival in the spring.
Yeah.
And so there was a real direct translation, even though it had nothing to do with China. So that's one of my favorite anecdotes as we think about the business success that comes from that specificity.
That's fantastic. Well, before I sign off, I just want to say that as a storyteller myself, I believe very much in the power of heroic storytelling and how it allows us to see the best version of ourselves in that. And I think anything that expands that aegis so that anybody can see themselves in any piece of heroic fiction is a good thing. It moves the world forward and puts us in a place where we need to be. So I just want to thank you very much for the work that you are doing and all your colleagues in this field to really broaden and deepen the accessibility of storytelling for audiences around the world. It's work that's been long overdue, and it's massively valuable and deeply appreciated. I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you. And everybody, keep watching and keep demanding the stories you want to see. We want to hear it.
Outstanding. Well, my name is Bill Coffin. This has been the Ethicast. We've been here with Julie Ann Crommet of Collective Moxie. For more, check it out at www.ethisphere.com/Ethicast. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
That was a terrific conversation with Julie Ann. I could have spoken with her all day long. To learn more about how Julie Ann can help your organization, please visit collectivemoxie.com. And to gain access to Julie Ann's keynote, as well as many more sessions, panel discussions, presentations, and other content, please visit globalethicssummit.ethisphere.com. Hit the button on the main page to register for on-demand tickets. The content will be on demand until July 19th. So be sure to register right away so that you can enjoy dozens of hours of premium ethics and compliance thought leadership. I'm Bill Coffin, and this has been the Ethicast. For more episodes, please visit the Ethisphere YouTube page at youtube.com/@ethisphere. And wherever you're watching us, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.